So when I think of digital signage, the things that I think about are to engage, to inform, and to entertain. That's what I think digital signage is supposed to do. So me being here today is not about convincing you that we need collaboration in out-of-home. It's to convince you that we need to be more intentional about the way we collaborate. And I am one of the few here today that comes to you not at this level, but down here. My experience in digital signage is very specifically with the LED world, with digital signage. And my reason for being a part of that is that I am part of contract fulfillment and really process development. And why that's important is because if we don't focus on those things, all of the beautiful stuff that you have seen from presenters before me tend not to have relevance. Now, I'm reminded from time to time that in the outdoor space, we are uninvited guests. Not unwelcome, but we are certainly not invited. So if we're going to play in that space, then I think it's really important that we become thoughtful and relevant. And those things take courage. So arguably, to forecast the future also takes courage. And when I think about where we're headed with digital signage, how we got there, I think, is out of home. I know we have some friends from APN here, and they'll probably recognize some of this content. And the thing that I think is interesting about digital out of home is where it came from. And that is, it started with static signage. And it was really a relatively simple model because back in before digital, you would take a static location, you would convert it to digital, and the sheer characteristics of the technology made it engaging. So your ad agencies didn't really have to work that hard because they had agreed on a physical format that they would create content for. Now, things have changed since then, and digital out of home now has more challenges because of the complexity of the advertiser and the demands that are being placed on them right now. And one of those things is the engagement aspect for out of home. And because their hands are so tied in that space by legislative or restrictions, it becomes a true challenge to make their inventory relevant. And so at a conference I was at last week, what I heard people say is that as a digital billboard operator, it is now their job to try and convince advertisers that their space is relevant. And they have to do that by identifying who the demographic is that's driving by. Now, the challenge with that is if they do happen to get that information correct, and by the way, who brought up facial recognition earlier? Someone here did. Rob did. I am a 12-year-old boy in terms of facial recognition. So the thing is, we have to make sure the data is correct, right? And so the gap that we have when that's our challenge as digital signage experts is that if the data isn't correct, how can you rely on the ad agency to have content that is relevant to someone that you didn't figure out properly with the data, right? So that is a true challenge for us. Now, because I want to focus specifically on LED technology, I think it's worth describing that out of home really is born from the physical side or the physical acceptance of this technology, right? That makes it easy to translate to advertisers. Well, when you start taking that type of technology and you bring it to other verticals, spectaculars and live events now start to pose a different challenge, right? They still are trying to create destinations and they're still trying to create an experience, but who they're competing with is a little bit different than it is in the retail space. And I chose not to focus on retail because there was exposure to that earlier through other speakers. Aside from the fact that all of these are forms of LED technology, the thing that makes people hot and sweaty most is content. And that's because we moved from the physical sense of something that was acceptable from a digital display in terms of format. We moved more towards the creative aspect because displays no longer have to be square. And that's the challenge that's posed to creatives. So the group here is probably not the 80% that I'm focused on as producing poor content. But there is a whole group outside of here that does find that challenging. So if we want to optimize this technology, it's probably important to know that there are two types of collaboration, and those two pieces have to work together. Because it's the physical, what we agreed upon is acceptable, and then there's the engagement aspect. So if those two aren't working together, then the proof of the physical makes no sense. And when I say that there's proof in the physical, you can touch a display, you can feel it, you can project manage it, right? You can't do that necessarily with engagement. It is all abstract. And so that's the challenge. And I'm flat out telling you that the current process right now does not allow for the greatest amount of success. What are we going to talk about if we're even talking about engagement? What we're talking about, if we're speaking about billboards, is that it's the content. And what's content? If I ask you, you will tell me the very obscene content is king. Now, we all know that the queen is the one who drives the king, but we believe that content is king. So it's ironic then that we lose focus on the engagement aspect because we've agreed on the physical. And we need to make sense of why something like that happens. And I believe that it's born from the fact that we make decisions about the physical long before we make them about engagement. So let's understand the build process. Looking over here, the traditional physical method, what often happens is in that collaborative space, somebody, probably an architect and the owner, decide that they want to do something, right? They come up with some concepts. They take those concepts and they ask manufacturers for preliminary drawings. But what they do is they put it out to a whole bunch of different manufacturers, so they get a bunch of different drawings, right? And then they decide on the detailed drawings and they put it out to bid. And that's when they start establishing their cost. And then they move to construction. Now the problem with that is that they selected a product based on economy and not on engagement, right? So they install something out in the field and then they don't understand why maybe they can't get a designer to build some content for it properly. But they never had that as part of the plan to begin with, and they didn't invest in a budget either. So moving away from the traditional method, what I see more and more is a design build method. And that is, again, where there's our preliminary drawings, but in that stage, they now engage the manufacturer. So it's the manufacturer and it's the architect and it's the designer or the owner who are working together to establish that cost. Again, they end up with detailed drawings and they go to construction, but what is still missing? The engagement. Now again, you're not the group I'm worried about, but I need you to carry the message forward. So to summarize, the current process has a common thread, and that is they are heavy on the physical, but they are light on the engagement. Now, I would say that that probably sounds a little dramatic when you take a look at an installation like Morgan Stanley and say, that is absolutely stunning. And it is. But the backstory on this is that it was poised for failure. And I'm going to tell you why. In 2015, Morgan Stanley decided that they were going to install new LED technology, and it was a replacement for equipment that had been out in the field for 20 years. Who initiated this? Construction. The construction group made the decision that it was time to change out the LED technology. A lot of that was just based on the fact that the equipment was 20 years old. So it was time for replacement, right? Now, they started this project in 2011, the construction guys. And initially, they were just going to go for straight replacement, but because some renderings had been done, they decided to add the barrels. Now, the construction people had the philosophy that whatever they replaced was going to run the same content. Can you imagine? This is what it looks like today. This is what it looked like. Now, thankfully, Morgan Stanley was on top of their game, and I just want you to know that they executed flawlessly. But they didn't bring on the marketing group until, I think my notes are 2014. So construction had a heads up. They were working on something in 2011. Marketing gets to find out what they're going to do in late 2014, and they install in 2015. By bringing that group to the table so late in the game, that was the first time anyone in that organization understood that they wanted to use digital visual data visualization for the content. And because of that fact, they had to install a whole different control system that cost upwards of $1 million. And because they were so late to the game, what happened is the creatives had a full 6 months of 18-hour days building content. I don't have an example of this next case because it wasn't one of our projects, so I'm trying to be discreet. But sometimes I can understand why construction doesn't want to bring market to the table too soon. And that's because of an installation that went wrong because collaboration was not mutual. There was a location that had decided they were going to add technology, and they had selected a vendor. And then they brought marketing in because they thought that's the thing to do. We want them brought in immediately. And all of a sudden the wheels started to spin and marketing said, no, 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 we want to go with a different vendor, and we want to take advantage of the advertising dollars, and then we also want to make sure that we're putting in technology in other parts of our facility. And that was all good and well, except for the construction team was then sort of left out of the loop. So what happens? They install the technology, and after it's installed, they find out it's too heavy for the structure. Right? Now that's not really the bad part because they had a fix for that. They took all the back panels off of the display, and that fixed the weight. But what they didn't factor in is that eventually there was going to be an event held there, and another group was going to release metallic confetti. So now without back panels in place, the ventilation system kicks in. And now, instead of just having a spectacular show with LED technology, now they also have smoke and fireworks. So, the point is, and why I'm sharing this with you, is that you can get really good results from creatives if you bring them to the table. But what we're trying to achieve is better collaboration. So I would propose that we look at how we go to build a little bit differently. We looked at the traditional method and we looked at the design build method. So those two things go away, and we're going to focus in on the center. What I would propose for collaboration is that the visioning starts up at the top and we have an overall concept. But then we need to bring the cost into the project immediately. We need to start thinking about what the budget is, and that's because when we sit down at the table, the collaborative table, we're sitting down with the right people. We're sitting down with the owners. We're sitting down with the creatives. We're sitting down with the construction people, and together we agree on what the goal is. Then you move to the preliminary drawing. And then you get another gate to check your costs, right? And so once all of that comes to agreement, then you move to the detailed drawings, and now guess what? Those drawings come together because you have included what content distribution is going to look like as well. And that's when you get construction and content strategy working together so that the first time you fire up, you're ready to roll. I would say that if we begin with the end in mind, we take advantage of all of the expertise that is available to us. And sometimes when you're thinking about what you do on a day-to-day basis, you start to think that maybe your judgment is clouded. And I know that's the case for me, except for when I take a call from a project manager that says, hey, these guys didn't figure out the content and we're getting ready to turn on in 3 days. Can we do something for them, right? That's when I know that the process is still broken. And it still makes me question what I'm thinking. And so it's refreshing then when you have that thought verified. And so I'm fully aware that casinos and resorts are something that are an American thing, right? But it's also more and more a retail space as well, if you look at Las Vegas. And so it struck me as ironic that as a week before I'm heading here to talk about this, I get this quote, and it was unsolicited by me. And it's that the most successful projects are those where the designer, construction manager, subcontractor, and specialty vendors work collaboratively as a team. So because we use digital signage as a vehicle to inform, entertain, and persuade, I think it's in our best interest to collaborate on a more intellectual level. And this is where we started off with this lovely rendering of Piccadilly Circus, and I, for one, am excited to see how they use collaboration to bring this to life. Thank you.